The fog rolled in thick as cotton over the mountain pass, just as Wyatt Harding's cattle started to bawl with nervous energy. And he knew right then that everything he had worked for over the past 6 months was about to come crashing down around him. The pass through the Ozark foothills was treacherous enough in clear weather, but in this dense white blanket that seemed to swallow light and sound, it was a death trap. One wrong turn, and his entire herd of 200 head would plunge off the cliffs into the ravines below, taking his ranch hands with them, and destroying any hope he had of paying back the loan that kept his family's land from falling into the bank's greedy hands. It was April of 1884, and Wyatt had been driving cattle from his ranch outside Muskogee, Oklahoma, to the railhead in Fort Smith, Arkansas, for the better part of a week. The journey normally took 10 days in good weather, and he had been making excellent time until this cursed fog descended without warning. His foreman, a grizzled old-timer named Pete Richardson, pulled his horse alongside Wyatt's and shook his head grimly. "We cannot move forward in this, boss," Pete said, his voice tight with concern. "I have been through this pass maybe 50 times, and I cannot see my hand in front of my face. We will lose half the herd and probably some men if we try to push through." Wyatt clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. At 26 years old, he had inherited the ranch from his father just 2 years prior, along with debts that had accumulated during his father's final illness. This cattle drive represented everything he had left to bet on. If he did not make it to Fort Smith by the deadline, the buyer would move on to another seller, and Wyatt would lose not just the sale but the ranch itself. "We do not have a choice," Wyatt said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "We have 4 days to make Fort Smith or we lose everything." Pete opened his mouth to respond, but a new voice cut through the fog, clear and surprisingly close. "You will not make it 4 feet into that pass, let alone 4 miles. Both men whirled in their saddles to see a figure emerging from the white mist like a ghost taking solid form. It was a woman, riding a sturdy paint horse with the easy confidence of someone who had been born in the saddle. She wore practical riding clothes, men's trousers tucked into well-worn boots, a canvas jacket over a simple cotton shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. As she drew closer, Wyatt could make out delicate features, intelligent dark eyes, and hair the color of autumn leaves pulled back in a practical braid. "Who are you?" Wyatt demanded, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle in his saddle holster. A woman alone in these parts was unusual enough to warrant suspicion. "Fiona Crawford," she said simply, bringing her horse to a stop a few yards away. Her voice had a musical quality despite its directness, with just a trace of an accent he could not quite place. "And before you ask what business it is of mine, I will tell you. I live in these mountains, and every few months some damn fool tries to push cattle through the pass in fog. Then I have to listen to cattle screaming as they fall to their deaths, and sometimes I find men at the bottom of the ravines too. It ruins my peace, and it stinks up the water when the bodies rot." Wyatt felt his back stiffen at her blunt words. "We appreciate your concern, Miss Crawford, but we know what we are doing. Do you?" She tilted her head, and even in the dim light filtered through fog, he could see the challenge in her eyes. "Tell me then, when the pass forks at the Big Oak, do you take the left path or the right?" "The right," Wyatt said with confidence. He had studied maps of this route for weeks. "Then you and your men will be dead within the hour," Fiona said flatly. "The right fork leads to a cliff edge. It has been that way since the earthquake 2 years ago shifted the whole mountainside." "Your maps are outdated," Pete sucked in a sharp breath. "The earthquake of '82, I heard about that, boss, shook buildings as far south as Muskogee. Wyatt studied the woman before him, trying to gauge whether she was telling the truth or running some kind of confidence scheme. "If what you say is true, how do you know the correct path?" "Because I live up here," Fiona repeated, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a slow child. "I have traveled this pass in every kind of weather for the past 4 years. I know every rock, every turn, every fork in the road. I can navigate it blind if I have to, and in fog this thick, that is essentially what I would be doing." "Why would you help us?" Wyatt asked, his suspicion still not fully abated. "What do you want in return?" Fiona was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. "I want you to hire me. Pay me what you would pay one of your ranch hands for the week, and I will guide you through to Fort Smith. Your cattle live, your men live, and I get enough money to make it through another month. Everybody wins." "A woman guide," Pete said, his tone skeptical. "No offense, miss, but this is dangerous work." "More dangerous than what I do every day," Fiona shot back. "I trap and hunt in these mountains alone. I have fought off wolves, bears, and men with worse intentions than either. I think I can handle leading some cattle through fog." Wyatt found himself intrigued despite his better judgment. There was something about this woman that commanded respect, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a fire. She sat her horse like a queen on a throne, completely at ease and utterly confident. If she truly could navigate the pass safely, she would be worth 10 times what he would pay a ranch hand. "What is your rate?" he asked. $30 for the week," Fiona said promptly. "That includes getting you safely through the pass and any other fog banks you might encounter between here and Fort Smith. If I fail, you pay me nothing." It was a fair offer, more than fair actually. A ranch hand made about $25 a month, so she was asking for roughly a week's wages. Still, Wyatt hesitated. Taking on a woman, especially one he did not know, felt like inviting trouble. As if reading his thoughts, Fiona added, "I know you have doubts, so how about this, we try it for 1 hour? I lead you into the pass, and if you do not feel safe, we turn back and you owe me nothing. But if I prove I can do what I say, you pay me the full rate and let me finish the job." Wyatt exchanged a glance with Pete, who shrugged. "We do not have many options, boss. Either we trust her, or we camp here and hope the fog lifts before our deadline." The thought of waiting was intolerable. Wyatt had not come this far to fail because of weather. He looked back at Fiona Crawford and made his decision. "All right, Miss Crawford, you have got yourself a job. But we do this my way. You lead from the front, but I ride right behind you. My men follow my signals. If anything seems wrong, we stop immediately." "Agreed, agreed," Fiona said, and he thought he detected the ghost of a smile on her lips. "Let me address your men first, so they know to follow my instructions." Wyatt nodded and called his crew forward. There were 6 ranch hands in total, all good men who had worked for the Harding family for years. They listened with varying degrees of skepticism as Fiona explained what she would be doing, but to their credit, none of them outright objected. They trusted Wyatt, and if he was willing to take a chance on this mysterious mountain woman, they would follow his lead. As the crew prepared to move out, Wyatt found himself riding up next to Fiona. Up close, he could see more details that the fog had obscured. She was younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 23 or 24, with a scattering of freckles across her nose and cheeks that gave her an almost girlish appearance. But her eyes were old, the eyes of someone who had seen hard times and survived them. "Where did you learn to navigate like this?" he asked as she urged her horse forward into the pass. "My father was a surveyor," Fiona said, her voice taking on a distant quality. He mapped half of Oklahoma and Arkansas before he died. He used to take me with him on his trips, taught me how to read the land, how to find my way using stars and landmarks, and even just the feel of the ground under my feet. After he passed, I kept doing it. It was the only thing I knew. What about your mother? She died when I was young. Some kind of fever. Fiona's tone made it clear she did not want to discuss it further, so Wyatt let the subject drop. They moved into the pass, and almost immediately, Wyatt understood why Fiona had been so insistent about the danger. The fog was so thick he could barely see Fiona's back, even though she rode only a few feet ahead of him. The world had shrunk to a tiny bubble of visibility, with ghostly rock walls looming up on either side and then disappearing just as quickly. He could hear the nervous lowing of the cattle behind him, the jingle of tack and creak of saddle leather, but he could not see any of it. What amazed him was how confidently Fiona moved through this white blindness. She never hesitated, never second-guessed herself. She would pause occasionally, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear, and then she would continue on with complete certainty. Sometimes she would call back instructions in a clear, carrying voice. There is a narrow section coming up. Keep the cattle moving but do not let them bunch. They need to go through single file. Or, rocks ahead on the left side. Steer right but not too far right or you will hit the opposite wall. Every instruction was precise, and every time Wyatt followed it, he found she was exactly correct. The narrow section appeared just as she said it would. The rocks were exactly where she predicted. Slowly, his skepticism began to transform into reluctant admiration. An hour passed, then two. The fog showed no signs of lifting, but they made steady progress through the pass. Fiona never faltered, never showed any sign of doubt or fatigue. She moved through the mountains like water flowing downhill, finding the natural path with an instinct that seemed almost supernatural. During a brief rest stop to let the cattle catch their breath, Pete rode up to Wyatt with an expression of wonder on his weathered face. "Boss, I have been through this pass dozens of times, and I am completely lost right now," he admitted. "I do not know if we are near the beginning, the middle, or the end, but that woman up there, she knows exactly where we are every second. It is the damnedest thing I have ever seen." Wyatt had to agree. He had traveled many trails in his life, worked with experienced guides and scouts, but he had never seen anyone navigate with the confidence and precision that Fiona Crawford displayed. It was more than just knowledge of the terrain. It was an almost spiritual connection to the land itself. As they prepared to move out again, Wyatt rode up beside Fiona. "You have proved yourself," he said. "The job is yours for the full week if you want it." "I want it," Fiona said simply. Then, after a pause, she added, "Thank you for giving me the chance. I know it was not an easy decision." "You are making me look smart for taking the risk," Wyatt said, and was rewarded with a genuine smile that transformed her serious face into something almost radiant. They continued through the pass, as the afternoon wore into evening. Wyatt found himself increasingly fascinated by his unexpected guide. She was unlike any woman he had ever met, completely self-possessed and comfortable in her own skin. There was no coyness about her, no attempt to soften her words or make herself more palatable to male company. She said what she thought and did what needed to be done without apology. As darkness began to fall, Fiona called for a halt. "There is a wide area just ahead where we can make camp for the night," she said. "We are about halfway through the pass. The fog might lift by morning, but if not, we can continue on." The campsite she led them to was perfect, a broad shelf of rock with enough space for the cattle to bed down and protection from the wind on three sides. There was even a small spring trickling down the rock face that provided fresh water. Wyatt marveled at how she had found such an ideal spot in complete darkness and heavy fog. While the men set up camp and got the cattle settled, Wyatt found himself watching Fiona. She moved with economical grace, helping where needed but never getting in the way. She seemed to anticipate what needed to be done before anyone asked, whether it was gathering wood for the fire or checking the security of the horses. When the camp was finally established, and the men were settling in around the fire with their evening meal of beans and salt pork, Wyatt noticed that Fiona had separated herself from the group, sitting on a rock at the edge of the firelight. She was eating from her own supplies, some kind of dried meat and hardtack, and seemed content with her solitude. Wyatt filled 2 tin cups with coffee from the pot and walked over to her. "Mind if I join you?" Fiona looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "It is your camp. You can sit wherever you like." "That is not what I asked," Wyatt said, settling himself on a nearby rock and offering her one of the cups. She took it with a nod of thanks. "I do not mind." They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching the fog swirl in the firelight. It was Wyatt who finally broke the quiet. "How long have you been living up here alone?" "4 years," Fiona said. "Since my father died." "That is a long time to be by yourself." "I am not always alone. I go into town sometimes for supplies." "And there are other people scattered through these mountains, trappers and hermits and folks who just want to be left alone. We look out for each other in our own way." "Is that what you want? To be left alone?" Fiona considered the question seriously. "I thought so for a long time. After my father died, I could not stand to be around people. Everything reminded me of what I had lost. Up here in the mountains I could just be. I did not have to pretend to be all right when I was not. I did not have to make small talk or explain myself to anyone." "And now?" Wyatt asked softly. "Now I think maybe I have been alone long enough," Fiona admitted. "I do not regret the time I spent up here. It taught me things about myself I needed to learn. But lately, I have been feeling like maybe it is time to rejoin the world a little bit." Wyatt felt something shift in his chest, a strange combination of hope and protectiveness that he did not fully understand. "What would you do if you did rejoin the world?" "I do not know," Fiona said honestly. "All I know is mountains and mapping and survival. Not exactly skills that are in high demand for a woman." "I disagree," Wyatt said firmly. "What you did today, navigating us through impossible conditions, that takes real skill and knowledge. There are plenty of outfits that would pay good money for a guide like you." "Maybe," Fiona said, but she did not sound convinced. "Most outfits would not hire a woman, no matter how skilled she is." Wyatt could not argue with that. The world they lived in was not kind to women who stepped outside traditional roles. But sitting there in the fog-shrouded darkness, watching Fiona's profile in the firelight, he found himself wishing it were different. The next morning brought no relief from the fog. If anything, it seemed even thicker than the day before. But Fiona was unfazed. She led them out of camp with the same quiet confidence, navigating through the increasingly treacherous terrain as if she were following a well-marked road. They emerged from the pass around midday, the land opening up into rolling foothills. The fog began to thin as they descended, and by late afternoon they were traveling under clear skies. The transformation was remarkable. One moment they were trapped in a white void, the next they could see for miles in every direction. Pete let out a whoop of relief. "Never thought I would be so happy to see the sun." The mood in the camp that night was celebratory. They had made it through the most dangerous part of the journey without losing a single head of cattle or injuring anyone. The men were convinced they had witnessed something close to a miracle, and they treated Fiona with a respect that bordered on reverence. Fiona herself seemed uncomfortable with the attention. She accepted their thanks with quiet grace, but retreated to her usual spot at the edge of camp as soon as she could politely do so. Once again, Wyatt found himself drawn to her solitude. "They mean well," he said as he settled beside her with 2 cups of coffee, a routine that was already becoming familiar. "I know," Fiona said. "I am just not used to being around so many people. It is a bit overwhelming." "We will be in Fort Smith in 3 days," Wyatt said. "Then you can go back to your mountains and your solitude." He meant it as a simple statement of fact, but something in his tone must have betrayed his feelings because Fiona looked at him sharply. "Is that what you want?" she asked. Wyatt took a long moment to answer, staring into his coffee as if it held the secrets of the universe. "No," he finally said. "No, it is not what I want at all." "Then what do you want?" Fiona's voice was barely above a whisper. Wyatt looked up and met her eyes. "I want to know if maybe you would consider staying on a bit longer, not as a guide but as a guest. I have a ranch outside Muskogee, about 200 acres with a good house and dependable water. It is not much, but it is home. I would like to show it to you." Fiona's expression was unreadable. Why? It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Because in the past 2 days, I have seen you do impossible things with a kind of grace and courage that takes my breath away. Because when I talk to you, I feel like I can be honest in a way I cannot with most people. Because the thought of saying goodbye to you in Fort Smith and never seeing you again makes something in my chest hurt." The silence that followed was excruciating. Wyatt had laid his cards on the table in a way he had never done with any woman before, and now he had to wait for her response. Part of him could not believe he had been so forward. They had known each other for less than 3 days, but there was something about Fiona that made him want to throw caution to the wind. "I have not been to a town in almost a year," Fiona said slowly. "And the last time I was there, I could not wait to get back to the mountains. Crowds make me anxious. Small talk makes me want to scream. I do not know if I would fit into your world, Wyatt." It was the first time she had used his given name, and the sound of it on her lips sent a thrill through him. "I am not asking you to fit into any world but your own," Wyatt said. "I am just asking you to give me a chance to know you better. If you hate it after a week, I will personally escort you back to your mountains and you will never hear from me again. But if you do not hate it, if maybe you find that you enjoy my company even half as much as I enjoy yours, then maybe we can see where this goes." Fiona was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his face as if looking for some sign of deception or ulterior motive. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "1 week," she said. "I will come to your ranch for 1 week, but I am not making any promises beyond that." "1 week is all I am asking," Wyatt said, and the smile that broke across his face was so wide it almost hurt. The remaining journey to Fort Smith passed in a blur. Wyatt found himself looking for excuses to ride beside Fiona, to talk with her, to learn more about her. He discovered that she had a wry sense of humor that emerged when she was comfortable, that she could identify bird calls with uncanny accuracy, that she had read more books than most educated men he knew because her father had believed in the power of learning. In turn, he told her about his own life, about growing up on the ranch and learning the cattle business from his father, about the weight of responsibility that came with being the sole provider for his aging mother and younger sister. He told her about his dreams of building the ranch into something great, not just for the money, but for the legacy it would leave behind. Fiona listened with an intensity that made him feel like every word mattered. She asked thoughtful questions and offered insights that showed she understood not just what he was saying, but what he meant beneath the words. It was intoxicating to be so fully heard and understood. They reached Fort Smith on schedule, and Wyatt completed the sale of his cattle for a price that exceeded his expectations. With the money safely deposited in the bank and his debts paid off, he felt like he could breathe fully for the first time in 2 years. He paid his ranch hands their wages plus a generous bonus and gave Fiona her $30. She took the money with quiet thanks, folding the bills carefully and tucking them into an inside pocket of her jacket. "This is the most money I have had at one time in years," she admitted. "You earned every penny," Wyatt said firmly. "Without you, we would still be stuck in that pass, or worse." That evening, Wyatt took Fiona to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Fort Smith. It was a bold move, bringing a woman dressed in men's work clothes to an establishment used to serving society ladies in silk and lace. But Wyatt did not care. Fiona looked beautiful to him in her practical clothing, with her sun-bronzed skin and her direct gaze. They attracted stares, of course. Whispers followed them to their table and continued throughout the meal. But Fiona held her head high and ignored the gossip with a dignity that made Wyatt proud. They talked for hours over steak and potatoes, losing track of time as the restaurant emptied around them. When they finally emerged into the night air, Wyatt felt like he was walking on clouds. He had spent one of the best evenings of his life with a woman who fascinated him more with every passing moment. As they walked back to the hotel where he had secured rooms for both of them, proper separate rooms because he was still a gentleman, Fiona suddenly stopped. "Wyatt, I need to be honest with you about something," she said, her voice serious. His heart sank. Here it comes, he thought. The rejection, the explanation of why this could never work. "I am not good at being what people expect a woman to be," Fiona continued. "I cannot cook fancy meals or sew a straight seam. I do not know how to make polite conversation at social gatherings. I spent 4 years in the mountains because that was easier than trying to fit into a world that did not have a place for someone like me." "Fiona," Wyatt said gently, taking her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond a handshake, and the contact sent electricity up his arm. "I do not want you to be what anyone expects. I want you to be exactly who you are. The woman who saved my cattle drive and who can navigate in the dark, and who says exactly what she thinks. That is the woman I am interested in getting to know better." Fiona looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. "1 week," she said, but there was a softness in her voice that had not been there before. "We agreed on 1 week." "1 week," Wyatt confirmed, "and then you can decide." They left Fort Smith the next morning, just the two of them. Wyatt had sent his ranch hands ahead with the empty supply wagons, wanting time alone with Fiona. They traveled at an easy pace, in no particular hurry, camping under the stars and talking until the fire burned down to embers. Wyatt learned that Fiona's mother had been a Cherokee woman, which explained the almost mystical connection she seemed to have with the land. Her father had been an Irish immigrant who fell in love with a native woman despite the social consequences. They had been happy, by all accounts, until disease took Fiona's mother when Fiona was only 7. After that, it had been just Fiona and her father, traveling the territory while he worked as a surveyor. He had taught her everything he knew, treating her not as a daughter who needed to be sheltered, but as a partner who needed to be prepared for whatever life threw at her. When he died of a heart attack 4 years ago, Fiona had been 20 years old and utterly alone in the world. "I could have gone to live with my mother's people," Fiona said as they sat by the fire on their second night of travel. "I have cousins in the Cherokee Nation who would have taken me in, but I did not feel Cherokee enough for them. My father raised me white, taught me to read and write English, gave me an Irish name. I would have been as much of an outsider there as I was anywhere else. So you went to the mountains, Wyatt said. So I went to the mountains, Fiona agreed. It seemed like the only place I could just be myself without having to explain or apologize or pretend to be something I was not. Wyatt understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. He had spent the past 2 years trying to be the man his father had been, trying to fill shoes that were never quite the right size. The weight of expectation could be crushing. What if you did not have to be anything except yourself? He asked. What if there was a place where you could just be Fiona without any labels or expectations? I do not think such a place exists, Fiona said sadly. Maybe we could create it, Wyatt said. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once they were spoken, he realized he meant them with every fiber of his being. Fiona looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. That is a dangerous thing to offer, Wyatt Harding. You barely know me. I know enough, Wyatt said firmly. I know you are brave and honest and capable. I know you say what you mean and do what you say. I know that when I am with you, I feel more like myself than I have in years. That is enough for me to want to try. They arrived at the Harding Ranch late on the 3rd day of travel. It was a modest spread as ranches went, but Wyatt was proud of it. The house was a solid 2-story structure built from local timber, with a wide porch that caught the afternoon breeze. There were several outbuildings, a good barn, corrals for the horses, and acres of grazing land that stretched to the horizon. Wyatt's mother, Margaret Harding, came out onto the porch when she heard them approach. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair and a no-nonsense air about her. Her eyes widened when she saw Fiona in her men's clothing, but to her credit, her expression of surprise quickly transformed into one of welcome. Wyatt, you did not mention you were bringing a guest, Margaret said, coming down the steps to greet them. Mother, this is Fiona Crawford. She guided us through the pass in heavy fog and probably saved our entire operation. Fiona, this is my mother, Margaret Harding. Pleased to meet you, madam, Fiona said, dismounting and offering her hand. Margaret shook it firmly. Any friend of Wyatt's is welcome here. Please come inside. You must be exhausted from your journey. Inside, the house was comfortable and well-maintained. Wyatt's younger sister, Emma, appeared from the kitchen, a lively girl of 19 with her father's blue eyes and her mother's practical nature. She took one look at Fiona and immediately began peppering her with questions about life in the mountains and how she had learned to navigate. Fiona answered with patient good humor, and Wyatt watched as she slowly began to relax in the warmth of his family's welcome. His mother showed Fiona to the guest room, a sunny space on the 2nd floor with a view of the grazing pastures, and left her to freshen up before dinner. Later, while Fiona was still upstairs, Margaret cornered Wyatt in the kitchen. She is not exactly what I expected when you said you were bringing a guest, Margaret said, keeping her voice low. I know, Wyatt said. But mother, she is remarkable. You should have seen her in that pass. She navigated in conditions that would have defeated the most experienced scout. I am sure she is very capable, Margaret said carefully. But Wyatt, you need to be realistic. A woman who wears trousers and lives alone in the mountains is not going to fit easily into society here. People will talk. Let them talk, Wyatt said with more heat than he intended. I am tired of worrying about what people think. Fiona is genuine and honest and brave, and that matters more to me than what the gossips in town have to say. Margaret studied her son's face for a long moment, then sighed. You care for her? Yes, Wyatt admitted. I know it is fast, and I know it probably seems crazy, but yes, I care for her. Then I will do my best to make her feel welcome, Margaret said, patting his cheek. But you be careful, son. The heart can lead us into trouble just as easily as it can lead us to happiness. Dinner that evening was a revelation. Fiona was quiet at first, clearly uncomfortable with the formal table setting and the abundance of food, but Emma's cheerful chatter soon put her at ease. They talked about everything from cattle prices to the latest books Emma had ordered from a catalog to the state of the territorial government. Wyatt watched Fiona come alive in the warmth of genuine acceptance. She told stories about life in the mountains that had Emma hanging on every word, and she answered Margaret's questions about her father's surveying work with obvious pride. By the time dessert was served, she was laughing at Emma's jokes and offering to teach her how to track animals. After dinner, Wyatt and Fiona walked out to the porch to watch the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "Your family is wonderful," Fiona said softly. "They like you," Wyatt said. "I can tell. Your sister is sweet, and your mother is formidable. I would not want to cross her." "No one does, not more than once," Wyatt said with a laugh. Then more seriously he added, "What do you think of the ranch?" "It is beautiful," Fiona said. "You can see why you love it." "I can see myself building a life here," Wyatt said. "Not just running cattle, but creating something permanent. A legacy." He did not say the rest of what he was thinking, that he could see Fiona as part of that legacy, but he suspected she knew anyway. The week that Fiona had agreed to passed far too quickly. She fell into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease, helping with chores and exploring the property with obvious enjoyment. She got along well with the ranch hands, who quickly learned to respect her knowledge and skills. When one of the horses came up lame, it was Fiona who diagnosed the problem and showed them how to treat it. When a section of fence needed repairing in a particularly difficult piece of terrain, Fiona was the one who figured out the best approach. Wyatt found himself falling deeper in love with her every day. He loved the way she moved, with unconscious grace and efficiency. He loved the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. He loved her dry sense of humor and her fierce independence and her unexpected moments of vulnerability. On the evening of the 7th day, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars come out, Wyatt knew he could not let her leave without telling her how he felt. "Your week is up," he said quietly. "I know," Fiona said, and there was something in her voice that made his heart race. "Have you decided what you are going to do?" Fiona was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I am terrified, Wyatt." "Of what?" "Of wanting this too much. Of letting myself hope that maybe I could have a life here with you, and then having it all fall apart. I have lost everyone I ever loved. My mother, my father, even the few friends I had growing up who moved away or got married and forgot about me. I do not know if I can survive losing someone else." Wyatt took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen. Life does not work that way. But I can promise that I will do everything in my power to build something good with you. Something strong enough to weather whatever storms come our way." "I do not know how to be a rancher's wife," Fiona said. "I do not know how to host parties or manage a household or any of the things that are expected." "Then we will figure it out together," Wyatt said. "Fiona, I am not asking you to change who you are. I am asking you to be yourself, here with me. If that means you wear trousers and work with the horses and spend half your time outdoors, then that is fine. If it means you never learn to make a fancy cake or sew a quilt, I do not care. I want you, exactly as you are." Fiona turned to look at him, and in the starlight he could see tears glistening in her eyes. "You really mean that? I have never meant anything more in my life." "I want to stay," Fiona whispered. "God help me, I want to stay so much it scares me." "Then stay," Wyatt said simply. "It has only been 2 weeks. People will say we are being reckless. People will say lots of things. The only opinions that matter are yours and mine." Fiona laughed, a sound that was half sob, half joy. "When did you get so wise?" "About the time I met a woman who could navigate through impossible fog and made me realize that sometimes you have to trust your instincts and take a leap of faith." Fiona squeezed his hand. "All right, I will stay. But Wyatt, I need you to understand something. I am not good at being vulnerable. I am not good at letting people see when I am scared or hurt. I have spent too many years building walls to protect myself. It is going to take time for me to learn how to let those walls down." "We have time," Wyatt said. "All the time in the world." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and when she did not, he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a promise of things to come rather than a demand for more. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. The next few months were a period of adjustment for everyone. Fiona moved into the ranch permanently, taking up residence in the guest room until such time as she and Wyatt made their relationship official. Margaret had insisted on propriety, and both Wyatt and Fiona had agreed it was the right thing to do. Fiona proved to be an invaluable addition to the ranch operations. Her knowledge of the land and her ability to track and navigate made her an excellent scout. She could find stray cattle that the ranch hands had given up on, locate sources of water during dry spells, and predict weather changes with uncanny accuracy. More than that, though, she brought a new energy to the ranch. Emma adored her and followed her around whenever Fiona would allow it, learning tracking and riding and all the skills that Fiona had mastered. Margaret, initially cautious, gradually warmed to Fiona as she saw how happy her son was and how hard Fiona worked to contribute to the household. The relationship between Wyatt and Fiona deepened with each passing day. They worked side by side during the day and sat together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Wyatt learned that Fiona loved thunderstorms and hated being indoors on sunny days. She learned that Wyatt had a beautiful singing voice that he only used when he thought no one was listening, and that he was afraid of failing to live up to his father's legacy. They had their first real argument in August, when Wyatt suggested that Fiona might want to buy some dresses for church on Sundays. She had bristled immediately, seeing it as an attempt to change her, and they had spent a tense evening in silence before finally talking it through. Wyatt explained that he had only been thinking of her comfort, knowing that people in town would stare and gossip. Fiona explained that she felt like wearing a dress would be abandoning the person she had fought so hard to become. In the end, they compromised. Fiona would wear her usual clothes most of the time, but she agreed to try a split riding skirt for occasions when they needed to go into town. It was not about giving in to social pressure, she said, but about finding a way to navigate between her world and his. It was during one of these trips to town that Wyatt decided it was time to make their commitment official. They were walking through Muskogee, Fiona in her split skirt and a simple blouse, looking more beautiful than any woman in silk and lace. People stared, of course, but Wyatt noticed that the looks were not all disapproving. Some of the townspeople seemed curious, even admiring of this woman who so clearly marched to her own drum. They stopped outside the general store, and Wyatt took both of Fiona's hands in his. "Marry me," he said. Fiona blinked in surprise. "What, marry me?" Wyatt repeated. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life. I love you, Fiona Crawford. I love your strength and your independence and your fierce heart. I love the way you look at the world and the way you challenge me to be better. I want to build a life with you, not just for now, but forever." Fiona stared at him, her eyes wide. "Wyatt, are you sure? I am not like other women. I will never be the kind of wife that people expect. I will never be content to just stay in the house and manage the household. I will always want to be outside, working, doing. I know, Wyatt said. And that is exactly why I want to marry you. I do not want a conventional wife. I want a partner, someone who will work beside me and challenge me and make every day an adventure. I want you. Tears were streaming down Fiona's face now. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Wyatt let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around right there in the middle of the street. People stopped and stared, but for once, neither of them cared. They were married in October of 1884, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with just family and close friends in attendance. Fiona wore a dress that Margaret and Emma had helped her choose, a simple cream-colored gown that made her eyes sparkle. Wyatt wore his best suit and could not stop grinning from the moment he saw her walking toward him until long after they had said their vows. The ranch hands threw them a party that lasted until dawn, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half the county. Fiona, who had claimed she could not dance, proved to be a quick learner, and she and Wyatt whirled around the makeshift dance floor until they were both dizzy and laughing. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a slow exploration of each other that left them both breathless and awed. Fiona had been nervous, admitting that she had no experience with physical intimacy. But Wyatt had been patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the big bed in what was now their shared room, Fiona traced patterns on Wyatt's chest. "I never thought I would have this," she said softly. "A home, a husband, a family. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone in the mountains." "What changed your mind?" Wyatt asked, running his fingers through her unbound hair. "You did," Fiona said simply. "You made me believe that maybe I could have both, that I could be myself and still belong somewhere, that I did not have to choose between being who I am and being with someone." "You will never have to make that choice," Wyatt promised. "Not with me." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. There were times when Fiona struggled with the demands of being a wife and a member of the community. Times when she felt the walls closing in and needed to disappear into the wilderness for a few days to breathe. Wyatt learned to recognize the signs and to give her the space she needed, trusting that she would always come back to him. There were also times when Wyatt struggled with the ranch, when cattle prices fell or disease swept through the herd or drought threatened their water supply. During those times, Fiona was his rock, using her knowledge and skills to help find solutions that he never would have thought of on his own. They learned to navigate the complexities of being a couple, two strong-willed individuals learning to compromise and communicate and build something together. They had arguments and misunderstandings, moments of frustration and hurt feelings, but they always worked through them because the foundation of their relationship was solid. In the spring of 1886, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of emotions. She was thrilled at the prospect of having a child with Wyatt, but also terrified. Her own mother had died young, and Fiona had no real model for what it meant to be a mother herself. Wyatt was over the moon, immediately becoming overprotective and insisting that Fiona cut back on her work around the ranch. This led to their biggest fight yet, with Fiona insisting that pregnancy was not an illness and she was perfectly capable of continuing to do what she had always done. "I am not made of glass," she said heatedly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and most of them did not spend 9 months sitting in a rocking chair doing nothing." "I just want you and the baby to be safe," Wyatt protested. "Then trust me to know my own body and my own limits," Fiona shot back. I promise I will not do anything dangerous, but I cannot just stop being myself because I am pregnant." They eventually reached another compromise. Fiona would continue to work around the ranch, but would avoid the most strenuous activities and would rest when she needed to. Wyatt, for his part, would stop treating her like she was fragile and trust her judgment. As her pregnancy progressed, Fiona found herself experiencing a deeper connection to the life she was building with Wyatt. Feeling the baby move inside her made everything feel more real, more permanent. This was not just a temporary arrangement that might fall apart at any moment. This was her life, her family, her future. Margaret proved to be an invaluable source of support and information, sharing her own experiences with pregnancy and childbirth, and reassuring Fiona when fears threatened to overwhelm her. Emma was excited at the prospect of becoming an aunt and had already started knitting tiny clothes for the baby. Their son was born in December of 1886, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's dark eyes. They named him Thomas, after Wyatt's father, and called him Tommy. Wyatt held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the love he felt for this tiny person. Fiona, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband cradle their child and felt her heart swell to bursting. She had been so afraid of losing people she loved, but looking at Wyatt and Tommy, she realized that the risk of loss was worth it for the joy of having them in her life. Motherhood transformed Fiona in ways she had not expected. She discovered reserves of patience she had not known she possessed, and a fierce protective instinct that rivaled any mother bear. She also discovered that she could balance being a mother with being herself, that the two identities were not mutually exclusive. She wore Tommy in a sling against her chest while she worked around the ranch during his first year, and later, when he was old enough to toddle, she took him with her on her explorations of the property. Wyatt would come home to find his wife and son covered in mud from exploring a creek bed, or poring over a bird's nest they had found, or tracking deer through the pastures. "You are raising him to be a wild thing," Wyatt said one evening, though his tone was fond rather than critical. "I am raising him to love the land and understand it," Fiona corrected. "The same way my father raised me. Is that so bad?" "No," Wyatt said, pulling her into his arms. "It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect." "Liar," Fiona said, but she was smiling. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in the fall of 1889. She had Wyatt's blue eyes and Fiona's red hair, and from the moment she was born, she was a force of nature. Where Tommy was thoughtful and observant, Rose was bold and adventurous, always getting into mischief and testing boundaries. "She is going to be trouble," Margaret said with a laugh, watching 2-year-old Rose attempt to climb onto a horse that was 10 times her size. "She is going to be amazing," Fiona said, scooping up her daughter before she could actually succeed in her climbing attempt. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under the combined efforts of Wyatt and Fiona, becoming known throughout the territory for the quality of its cattle and the innovative approaches to ranching that Fiona brought to the operation. Her ability to predict weather and find water sources proved invaluable during the dry years, and her tracking skills meant they rarely lost cattle to strays. Wyatt's reputation grew as well. He became known as a fair and honorable businessman, someone whose word could be trusted and who treated his employees well. He served on the town council in Muskogee and became an advocate for more progressive policies, including education for women and fair treatment of the native peoples who still lived in the territory. As the years passed, Tommy and Rose grew into remarkable young people. Tommy inherited his mother's connection to the land and his father's business sense, becoming an invaluable part of the ranch operations as soon as he was old enough to help. Rose inherited her mother's fierce independence and her father's charm, becoming a skilled horsewoman and a champion for causes she believed in. In 1895, when Tommy was 9 and Rose was 6, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and for the first time, she allowed herself to slow down and accept help. The baby, another boy they named William, was born healthy and strong in the spring of 1896. William was a quiet child, content to sit and observe the world around him for hours. As he grew, it became clear that he had inherited his mother's analytical mind and his father's steadiness. He loved numbers and patterns, and by the time he was 5, he was helping his father with the ranch accounts. By 1900, the Harding Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the territory. They had expanded their holdings, acquired more cattle, and built a reputation that extended far beyond Muskogee. But for Wyatt and Fiona, the true measure of their success was not in acres or head of cattle, but in the family they had built and the life they shared. One evening in late summer, as the 20th century was still new, Wyatt and Fiona sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had done so many times before. Their children were inside with Margaret, who at 70 was still spry and actively involved in the lives of her grandchildren. Emma had married a few years before and lived nearby with her own growing family. "You ever miss it?" Wyatt asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "The mountains, the solitude, the life you had before." Fiona considered the question seriously, as she always did. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, the quiet. But then I look at what we have built here, the family we have created, and I know I would not trade it for anything. Even on the days when the kids are driving you crazy and the cattle are being difficult and nothing goes according to plan." "Even then," Fiona said firmly, "because at the end of those days I still get to fall asleep next to you. I still get to wake up in a house full of people I love. That is worth more than all the peaceful solitude in the world." Wyatt reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "I love you, Fiona Harding, more now than the day I married you, if that is even possible." "It is possible," Fiona said softly, "because I feel the same way. You gave me something I never thought I would have, a place to belong, a reason to stay, a home." "You gave me all of that too," Wyatt said. "Plus, you saved my cattle drive, which was pretty important at the time." Fiona laughed, the sound still as musical as it had been 16 years ago when Wyatt first heard it. "I suppose I did. Best $30 you ever spent hiring me." "Best decision I ever made was asking you to stay," Wyatt corrected. "The money was just the excuse to spend time with you." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the house, they could hear the children laughing at something their grandmother had said, the sounds of family and life and love. In the years that followed, Wyatt and Fiona faced the challenges that come with any long life together. There were droughts and hard winters, economic downturns and personal losses. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1905, and both Wyatt and Fiona grieved the loss of the woman who had welcomed Fiona into the family with such grace. But there were joys too. They celebrated as Tommy married a sweet-natured girl from town and took over more of the ranch operations. They watched with pride as Rose became a teacher, using her education to help other young women find their way in the world. William, true to his nature, became an accountant and helped modernize the ranch's financial systems. Grandchildren arrived, a whole new generation of Hardings to carry on the legacy. Wyatt and Fiona took the same joy in their grandchildren that Margaret had taken in hers, passing on stories and skills and values. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1909, Wyatt surprised Fiona with a trip back to the mountains where they had first met. They rode up to the pass where she had found him that foggy day so many years ago, and they camped under the stars just as they had during that first week of getting to know each other. "You remember what I said to you that night by the fire?" Wyatt asked as they lay together looking up at the Milky Way. "When I asked you to come to the ranch, you said a lot of things that night," Fiona said with a smile. "Most of them embarrassingly romantic for a man who had known me less than 3 days. I said I wanted to create a place where you could just be yourself," Wyatt reminded her. "Do you think we managed it? Do you feel like you can be yourself here?" Fiona turned to look at him, this man who had loved her so faithfully for so long. His dark hair was now threaded with silver, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her, he was still the handsome cowboy who had taken a chance on a strange mountain woman. "I do not just feel like I can be myself," Fiona said. "I feel like you helped me become a better version of myself than I ever could have been alone. You gave me space to be wild when I needed it and anchor when I needed that too. You never tried to change me or make me fit into a mold. You just loved me, exactly as I was." "That was the easiest thing in the world," Wyatt said, "because exactly as you are is pretty spectacular." They made love that night under the stars, with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never quite faded despite the years. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Fiona felt a completeness that she had never imagined possible in those lonely years in the mountains. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both large and small. The territory became a state in 1907, transforming Oklahoma from a frontier region into an established part of the United States. The world around them modernized, with automobiles beginning to replace horses and electricity coming to even rural areas. Through it all, Wyatt and Fiona remained constants in each other's lives. They adapted to changes when they needed to, but never lost sight of the core values that had brought them together: hard work, honesty, respect for the land, and love for family. In 1920, as they celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together people from all over the county. There were ranch hands who had worked for them for decades, townspeople who had come to respect Fiona despite her unconventional ways, family members spanning 3 generations. Speech after speech praised Wyatt and Fiona for their contributions to the community, their innovative ranching practices, their commitment to education and progress. But when it came time for Wyatt to respond, he kept it simple. "The only thing I ever did that was worth anything was convince this woman to take a chance on me," he said, pulling Fiona close. "Everything else, all the success and happiness, flows from that one decision. So thank you, Fiona, for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me." Fiona, never comfortable being the center of attention, managed to keep her composure long enough to add, "And thank you, Wyatt, for seeing me when I did not think anyone could, for loving me when I did not think I was worthy of love, for giving me a home and a family and a purpose beyond just surviving. You changed my life in the best possible way." There was not a dry eye in the room. As they grew older, Wyatt and Fiona gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Tommy and his family. They remained active and involved, but they also allowed themselves time to simply enjoy each other's company. They took trips to visit Rose and William, spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly, and spent long evenings on the porch talking about everything and nothing. Wyatt's health began to decline in the late 1920s. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down that comes with age. Fiona watched with concern as he tired more easily, as tasks that had once been simple became difficult. She adjusted their routines to accommodate his limitations, never making him feel diminished, but simply adapting as they always had. In the spring of 1931, Wyatt suffered a heart attack while out checking on the new calves. Fiona was with him, as she so often was, and she held him as he struggled to breathe. She sent William, who had been helping them that day, to fetch the doctor, but she knew even before the doctor arrived that it was serious. Wyatt recovered from that first attack, but it left him weakened. The doctor was blunt about his prognosis. Wyatt's heart was failing, and while he might have months or even a year or two, his time was limited. Wyatt took the news with remarkable calm. "I have had a good life," he told the doctor. "Better than I ever had any right to expect. If my time is coming, then I am ready." But Fiona was not ready. After 47 years of marriage, she could not imagine a world without Wyatt in it. She had known, intellectually, that one of them would eventually leave the other, but facing the reality of it was devastating. For the first time in decades, Fiona found herself wanting to run back to the mountains to escape the pain that she knew was coming. But she did not run. She stayed because Wyatt needed her and because running had never really solved anything. Instead, she made the most of the time they had left. They talked for hours, reminiscing about their life together, about the children they had raised and the legacy they would leave behind. They sat on the porch and watched sunsets, held hands, and simply existed in each other's presence. Wyatt died peacefully in his sleep on a warm July night in 1932. Fiona woke to find him gone, his face relaxed and peaceful. She did not cry right away. She simply lay there next to him, holding his hand, memorizing every detail of his face and thanking him for the gift of their life together. The funeral was enormous. Wyatt had been respected and loved throughout the county, and people came from hundreds of miles away to pay their respects. Fiona sat through it all with dry eyes and a composed expression, accepting condolences with grace and thanking people for coming. It was only later, when everyone had gone home and she was alone in the house that had been theirs for so many years, that she finally allowed herself to break down. She cried for the man she had lost, for the future they would not have together, for the loneliness that stretched ahead of her. But even in her grief, Fiona knew she would survive this. She had survived loss before, and Wyatt had taught her that she was stronger than she knew. She had their children and grandchildren, a ranch that still needed her, a purpose beyond just her own pain. In the months that followed, Fiona threw herself into work. She helped Tommy with the ranch, spent time with her grandchildren, and took long rides through the property, visiting all the places that held memories of Wyatt. She also began writing down their story, the tale of how a lost cowboy and a lonely mountain woman had found each other in the fog and built a life together. She wrote for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, so they would know where they came from and what kind of love had created their family. As she wrote, Fiona realized something important. Yes, she had lost Wyatt, and yes, the pain of that loss was immense. But she had not lost what they had built together. The ranch still stood. Their children thrived. Their grandchildren carried pieces of both of them into the future. The love they had shared had created something permanent, something that would outlast both of their physical lives. Fiona lived for another 15 years after Wyatt's death, remaining active and engaged until the very end. She died in the fall of 1947, at the age of 87, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. At her funeral, Tommy read from the story she had written, the tale of two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. He read about the fog-shrouded pass where it all began, about a cowboy who needed a guide and fell in love with her instead, about a woman who thought she was meant to be alone until someone showed her otherwise. "My mother used to say that the best things in life come from taking risks," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. "She took a risk when she agreed to guide my father through that pass. He took a risk when he asked her to stay. And both of them took a risk when they chose to love each other, despite all the reasons it might not work. Those risks paid off in ways neither of them could have imagined." He closed the book and looked out at the assembled crowd, at the family that Wyatt and Fiona had created, at the legacy they had left behind. "They are together now," he said. "And I like to think they are sitting on some celestial porch, watching the sunset and talking about how lucky they were to find each other. Because that is what they always did, even to the end. They counted their blessings instead of their troubles, and the biggest blessing they ever had was each other." As Tommy spoke, a fog began to roll in over the cemetery, unusual for that time of year. It was thick and white, just like the fog that had brought Wyatt and Fiona together all those years ago. Some of the mourners shivered at the sight, seeing it as an omen or a sign. But the family, those who had heard the story so many times they could recite it by heart, they just smiled. Because they knew that somewhere in that fog, Wyatt and Fiona had found each other again, and they were finally home. The ranch continued to thrive for generations after their deaths, run by their descendants who carried on the values and traditions that Wyatt and Fiona had established. The story of how it all began, of the cowboy who needed a guide and the woman who could navigate through impossible fog, became family legend, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren. And sometimes, on foggy mornings in the mountains, old-timers would swear they could see two figures on horseback, riding side by side through the mist. A man and a woman, together as they had always been meant to be, navigating the paths that had brought them together and showing the way for all who followed. Because true love, the kind that Wyatt and Fiona shared, does not end with death. It echoes through the generations, a permanent mark on the world that says, we were here, we loved each other, and that love created something that will last forever. Their grave markers stood side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, simple stones that bore only their names and the dates of their lives. But carved beneath those dates were the words that Tommy had chosen, words that captured the essence of their relationship. She showed him the way through the fog. He showed her the way home. And that, in the end, was the truest summary of their love story. Two lost souls who found each other in the wilderness and discovered that home was not a place, but a person. Two strong individuals who became stronger together. Two people who took a chance on love and built a legacy that would outlast them both. The Harding Ranch stood for over 100 years, a testament to what Wyatt and Fiona had created. Even when it was eventually sold out of the family in the 2000s, the new owners preserved the original ranch house, recognizing it as a historical landmark. Tourists would come to visit, to walk through the rooms where Wyatt and Fiona had lived and loved, to stand on the porch where they had watched countless sunsets together. And always, the guides would tell the story. The story of the fog and the pass and the cowboy who needed help and fell in love instead. The story of a woman who thought she was meant to be alone until someone showed her she was meant to be cherished. The story of a love that started with necessity and grew into something transcendent. It was a story that resonated across the decades because it spoke to something fundamental about the human experience. We are all lost in our own ways, stumbling through fog both literal and metaphorical. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, we find someone who can guide us through to the other side. Someone who sees us as we truly are and loves us not despite our quirks and flaws but because of them. Wyatt and Fiona had been that for each other. And in being that, they had created something that would inspire generations to come. A reminder that the best partnerships are not about one person completing another, but about two complete people choosing to walk through life side by side, supporting each other through the fog, and celebrating together in the clear light of day. Their love story became the foundation myth of a family, the North Star by which their descendants navigated their own relationships. When times got hard, when marriages struggled, family members would remember Wyatt and Fiona. They would remember that love requires work and compromise and commitment. They would remember that the best relationships honor both people's individuality while creating something new together. And so, even though Wyatt and Fiona have been gone for many decades now, their influence lives on. In the values of hard work and integrity that their descendants carry. In the respect for the land and its resources that they instilled. In the belief that love is worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth building a life around. The fog in the past still rolls in sometimes, thick and impenetrable, just as it did that day in 1884 when a desperate cowboy met a mountain woman who would change his life. And when it does, those who know the story pause and remember. They remember that sometimes the things that seem like obstacles are actually opportunities. That sometimes the people who seem most unlikely to fit into our lives turn out to be exactly what we need. They remember Wyatt and Fiona, the cowboy and the guide, the man who needed help and the woman who could navigate any pass, no matter how treacherous. They remember a love story that started in the fog and lasted a lifetime, a partnership built on mutual respect and trust, and a deep abiding affection that never faded. And in remembering, they find hope for their own journeys. Because if two people as different as Wyatt and Fiona could find each other and build something so beautiful, then maybe there is hope for all of us. Maybe we too can navigate through our own fog and find someone waiting on the other side. Someone who will see us truly and love us completely. Someone who will walk beside us through whatever passes life requires us to cross. That is the legacy of Wyatt and Fiona Harding. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, though those things matter too. But rather, a reminder that love is the greatest adventure of all, and that the journey is worth taking, no matter how foggy the path ahead might be.